We are, I think, yes. Good morning. And welcome on this appropriately warm first Sunday of summer. The Washington Congregational Church, I am glad to see all of you this morning. Are there any announcements this morning? Yes, Grace.
Just want to mention to everybody that we have a special treat for our post-school today. Every Binckes will be playing tomorrow morning.
Excellent. So for our postlude today, Jeffrey Binckes will be playing our some Rachmaninoff. And if that's what he was practicing beforehand, it is beautiful, and you might want to sit and stay and listen to it. Yes, Mike.
Thank you to everyone that enjoyed and came to our senior luncheons. We did the last one on Thursday, and we're going to do something again in September, but we haven't figured out exactly how it's going to work. So if you didn't come Thursday, we sent out a brochure. We're going to do something in September, but we're not quite sure how we go or in person. So I'll let you know.
All right, so another successful senior luncheon, and next one to come, taking a little summer break. Next one to come in September with details about that to come soon. Yes, Nancy.
Yes, we can't
July.
All right. So next Sunday is the first Sunday of the month, which is Food Pantry Sunday. So bring your donations to the food pantry. I'm not sure if there are still lists out there of recommended food items that are in particular need for the Washington Food Pantry, but if not, you can ask Sue Hofstetter about that, which means it is also Communion Sunday. A little note about that. We are going to have communion in the sanctuary next week. We're not gonna leave, but I would encourage you to bring your own elements if you would like. I think we're not passing out elements. So we'll have the little to-go ones, which are useful but not delicious. We'll say that. So yes, so that is next Sunday. And then Sue, you have any information on Saturday's activities?
Okay, everybody pray. Right now it's supposed to. We're not sure what we'll do if it rains, but we might have it inside. Leave everything down to the lower level. So, and Thursday we'll be doing our final pricing at 10 a.m. and when they're on feel free, or if you have something you want to drop off, feel free to bring those on Thursday.
All right, and okay, so next Saturday is the church tag sale in conjunction with the Snow Riders yard sale at Camp Morgan, and the farmers market is happening, and there's a book sale at the library, and it's going to be a hub of activity here in Washington. They are going to do final pricing and preparations Thursday at 10 a.m. So if you'd like to come volunteer, so that means you still have a few days to dig through your closets and your garages and your attics for wonderful items to contribute to this sale. Sue, what is the timing on that? Because the sign at the transfer station says 7 to 1.
I believe that's the Snow Riders.
Okay.
We're being a little older. We're doing 9 to 2.
Okay.
But anyone who'd like to help us set up, we're starting at 8.
Okay, so setup here is at 8 o'clock. So you could shop at 7 o'clock, be one of those wonderful early birds, go to Camp Morgan, do your shopping, then come here and help prep for the sort of brunchy sale here at the church. I was wondering about that, and I was thinking, wow, 6 a.m. is going to be really early for us. Okay, no, 8 a.m. That's a reasonable time for us to be here. So strong bodies especially needed at 8 a.m. to haul tables outside in the not rain, which we will be praying for this week. All right, any other announcements? Oh, actually, there was one quick announcement about that. Other announcement about next Saturday is that if you see Bob Hofstetter wandering around, make sure you wish him a happy birthday. And also the following day, so on Sunday, which is also our Communion Sunday, it does happen to also be the 4th of July. So we will be having a somewhat little special service with some songs and some poetry, and that is Grace's birthday. So it will just be a wonderful, celebratory, active weekend, and then we'll all take naps. All right, any other announcements? All right, then let us gather in with our candle lighting and our choral introit. Let us rise in body or spirit as we join in our call to worship. Sing praises to God, all you faithful ones. Where there was no way, where there was no mercy, where there was weeping, let us join in singing our opening hymn, O Christ the Healer, We Have Come, which is printed on the insert in your bulletin. O Christ the Healer, we have come. To be your friend, and we hope to be restored. When this my love and ends. From every errant passion please claim to be free. What in our hearts we would confess, but yours records our deeds best need. In conflicts that destroy our health, we recognize the world's disease, our common ground declares our best. Is there no promise for peace? Grant that we all one in faith, unity may fight, stand enriching us, shall reach our cause. You may be seated. And I appreciate your endurance with that new tune. That was hard to follow. We did it though. God calls us in our lives to take a risk, like singing a new hymn, to be like the woman in the gospel who reaches out to Jesus for healing for herself, or the father who risks the scorn of others to bring Jesus to his dying daughter. Let us ponder for a moment the places of our lives where we may resist turning to God for healing and change. Let us join in our litany of confession. When we resist your call to open our hearts to allow the freshness of your grace to enter, God have mercy. When we close our eyes to your new and unexpected possibilities of healing and reconciliation, Christ have mercy. When we let fear overwhelm us and cling to the security of what we know instead of risking new steps toward your freedom and justice, God have mercy. God's mercies are fresh every morning. In Christ, God offers forgiving grace and welcome into a community of trust, abundance, and hope. Let us give thanks for the mercy of God and pass the peace of Christ in community among us. And I know this is not our tradition, but if you will turn side to side, you don't have to shake hands or anything, but just offer a peace be with you to those around you. We can pass the peace. And now our liturgist will come forward and read our scripture this morning.
Good morning. First reading this morning is from Lamentations. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. It is good that one shall wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for one to bear the yoke in youth, to sit alone in silence when the Lord has imposed it, to put one's mouth to the dust, there may yet to be hope, to give one's cheek to the smiter and be filled with insults. For the Lord will never reject forever. Although he causes grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not willingly afflict or grieve anyone. The second reading is from the book of Mark. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jager, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went with them, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my cloths?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they had come to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one would know this and told them to give her something to eat.
Will you pray with me? And I invite you to join in on the second time through in this prayer. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God. Amen. All right, settle in. Because I typed this one out and it's a little long. Just warning. Near the beginning of the pandemic, I started seeing the signs on the front lawns. Fear has no home here. At first, I appreciated the signs as companions to the previous iteration, hate has no home here. I marveled at the courage of those posting the signs, reflecting my own belief that so many of our actions, biases, and even anger towards others are based on fear. And then I saw a house that had one of those signs and a political sign that clued me in to the true intention behind the message. Oh, I realized. They mean, don't wear a mask. The idea of a link between strong faith and freedom from fear is an ancient one. After all, the most frequently used phrase in the New Testament is, be not afraid. Paul writes about how perfect love casts out fear. Have no fear, we're told. Just put all your trust in God. God will protect you if you have great enough faith. God will protect me from what exactly? See, to my mind, there are three main kinds of fear. One based on fact, one based on belief, and one based on the unknown. Fear based on fact can lead us to have healthy caution and make changes to help protect ourselves and others from harm. A fear of dying in a car accident leads us to wear seatbelts and fund improvements at dangerous intersections. A fear of cancer gets us to put on sunscreen, stop smoking, and do regular self-exams. A fear of predators attacking our livestock motivates us to put up electric fencing. And a fear of contracting and spreading a deadly virus should move us to wear masks, keep our distance from each other, and get vaccinated when it's available. Because research and experience have taught us that those things do actually make a difference and improve outcomes. It's science. And science is not the antithesis to God. Belief in science does not mean not trusting God. Science is a process of understanding the world in which we live, the world God created, but that God does not run or operate in minutia like a giant puppet master or screenwriter. But instead, people have acted on fears based on belief. Belief in how our government is supposed to work, belief that God does control everything and plan everything out, and there is nothing we can do to change what happens anyway. Belief that their individual choice and freedom is a higher priority than the good of all. Those beliefs, friends, have devastating consequences. Those beliefs are why the United States has the highest COVID infection rate in the entire world. Those beliefs are why over 600,000 Americans have died from this virus, more than anywhere else on the planet. Those beliefs are why, when you look at the coronavirus map from Johns Hopkins, most everywhere else in the world has red dots of infection. Some more clumped together than others, for sure, but still discernible as dots, while half the United States is just solid red. At the heart of our story from the gospel this week, and the one from last week, is the juxtaposition of faith and fear. Let's look at last week's story first, since I didn't get to preach my sermon on it. It was really hard to just sit quietly by. When caught in a storm while crossing the lake, Jesus chides the disciples for their fear, wondering about their faith. One of the questions that I posed for you to reflect on last week was, what were the disciples afraid of? And the answer seemed clear. Drowning, obviously. There was a storm. There was water in the boat. But is that really what scared them? Remember, at least 2 of the disciples were fishermen. They're used to being out on boats, caught in storms, and there were other boats out on the lake with them. It says that right in Mark. No mention of the whole lot of them being at risk of sinking. Mark says that they got in the boat to go to the other side. What's on the other side? Because Mark doesn't elaborate, we gloss over that part like it doesn't matter. It's not important. Except remember, context always matters. We need to remember that the writers of the Gospels are writing for a local audience, even many years later, but ones who would understand the subtleties and inferred meaning that are sometimes lost on us. So what's on the other side? The Gentiles. In going from the eastern to the western side of the lake, Jesus and the disciples are heading into foreign, unfamiliar territory. They will be even greater outsiders than they already are in their own community. They have no idea how they will be received. Turns out the people in that community ask him to leave pretty much immediately after he casts out some demons from somebody, which is how we end up this week with Jesus having crossed back over. Could it be that the disciples were really afraid of the other side, and the storm was just adjacent to that fear? Did they fear that Jesus didn't really care what happened to them and was just leading them into disaster? Is it possible that when Jesus scolds them about not having faith, it's because they act like they have been abandoned, that they have forgotten that no matter the storms that arise, God is always with them, and in this case, literally, physically present with them in the boat? All right, chew on those questions for a while we look at the stories from this week's text. So Jesus has come back from the other side and is immediately surrounded by a crowd again. Out of the crowd emerges a leader of the synagogue, a man whose 12-year-old daughter is dying. He pleads for Jesus to come heal her. Seems fairly reasonable, right? Nothing particularly interesting. Jesus probably got a lot of pleas for help once his reputation got around. Except Jairus is a leader of the synagogue that doesn't really like Jesus, that thinks Jesus is too full of himself, that declares that Jesus doesn't follow the rules. Yet all that falls away in the face of the crisis that has arisen. This man, Jairus, is first a father, then a religious leader. He is afraid. He is terrified of losing his baby girl just at the brink of adulthood. And then comes word. Don't bother bringing Jesus. It's too late. She's dead. Can you imagine this man's reaction? The crumpling of his face, the breaking of his heart. Yet Jesus reassures him, don't fear, just believe. All is not lost. They leave the crowd behind, and only 3 disciples accompany Jesus and Jairus back to the house. It was the tradition at that time for families, especially prominent families, to hire professional mourners to weep and wail and make a ruckus about a death. And they are already there in full force. Jesus tells them that the girl is not actually dead, and they laugh at him. He is so ridiculous as to not even invoke anger or incredulousness, but hilarity. He kicks them out. The house is quiet. Peter, James, John, Jesus, Jairus, and Jairus' wife go in to where the child is. There she is, so still, so lifeless. And Jesus reaches out to hold her hand. Wait, stop. Context. Let's assume for a moment that despite Jesus' statement to the contrary, that everyone else in the room thinks that this young girl has actually died. Jesus just reached out and touched her. Anyone see an issue with that? A couple nods, but most of you are not first century Jews, so you probably don't. Okay. Cleanliness codes are extensive in the Jewish tradition. Touching a dead body, we don't do that. Makes you unclean. Jesus has crossed a line for a moment. Then he tells her to get up, and she does. But imagine the gasp in that moment before she gets up. He doesn't just call her to get up, standing from the doorway. Talitha cum, get up. No, he touches her to make abundantly clear maybe one of 2 things. Either A, she's really, really not dead. Or B, cleanliness codes are rules meant to be broken. Because actually, he's already broken that one already once that day. So let's back up to a second to that in-between Jairus' requests and Jesus' arrival at his house. On their way to Jairus' house, Jesus was surrounded by a crowd, eager to be near him and to hear his teachings. In that crowd was a woman who had a condition which left her bleeding for the last 12 years. She had done everything she could to try and be healed, spent everything she had, and was still suffering and in fact growing worse. But she, like Jairus, had heard about Jesus and thought maybe he could help. So she wove herself into the crowd. Pause. Context. Cleanliness. A bleeding woman was unclean. Women were sent away to be separate from everyone during their monthly cycles and after childbirth. And cleanliness was contagious, or uncleanliness was contagious. You could not touch a bleeding woman and then go to the synagogue, for instance. This woman had spent more than a decade, Jairus' daughter's entire lifetime, isolated from her community, untouched and not touching for fear of contamination, regarded as an outcast. She is most certainly afraid of what the future may hold if she is never made well. Yet here she is, hiding her face, perhaps, so no one knows who she is, afraid of being called out. Or maybe she is from away, so is a stranger, her condition unknown to those around her, but determined to be freed from this prison. She pushes through the crowd, maybe slightly overwhelmed by being so close to others after so much time, and reaches out to touch just his clothing, perhaps his religious covering, what we'd now call a talit, or the fringe hanging from it. Just that, she is sure, will bring her healing, not only of her physical condition, but hopefully socially and religiously as well. And she's right. Her bleeding immediately ceases. But to her surprise and dismay, even though she barely touched him in the midst of a pressing crowd, Jesus notices. He stops, though they are supposed to be rushing to try and save Jairus' daughter. "Who touched me?" he asked. The disciples are incredulous. "Okay, but there are tons of people around you. What do you mean, who touched me?" "Lots of people are touching you." Jesus remains, despite the urgency to continue on, searching the crowd for the person who has not asked for the power of his healing, but simply taken it. The woman, we never learn her name, maybe Jesus never did either, makes a decision to face the music. Very slowly, she moves forward and drops at Jesus' feet. She's trembling in fear, worried about what he'll do to her, what the crowd might do when they find out what she's done. And her whole story, her whole truth spills out of her like tears from her eyes. To her amazement, Jesus offers no scolding, no condemnation. "Daughter," he names her, "your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed from your disease." Her faith that Jesus could bring healing into her life allowed her to act, to break all the rules that were holding her back from a restoration to wholeness, from life, despite the risk and her fear. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, this is all well and good. Thank you for explaining these stories a bit, but the sermon is kind of long and we're hot. And what exactly does any of it have to do with COVID-19 or our lives today? And some of you may be just thinking about how fast we can get outside and talk to each other. Fair enough. Here's the thing. Many conversations have come up in the last 15 months about what role fear plays in our decisions, in our individual lives and those of our church. Shouldn't we just trust God to protect us? Are we not being faithful if we restrict our lives and close the church? Are we just letting fear run our lives? Short answer, God makes no guarantees about faith protecting us from illness and dying. None. So no, we should not just rely on God to protect us from disease. As for letting fear run our lives, well, again, I think a certain level of fear and caution based on fact is warranted. And I think the church is actually afraid of a lot of things. What might happen if we put restrictions on people is one of them. Another one of the questions I posed for you last week was, what does it mean for the church to go to the other side? The deeper questions were, what is on the other side and why are we afraid to go there? And what storms might we face along the way? Questions associated with this week's stories might be, what codes or rules, spoken or unspoken, are we adhering to that are keeping us from wholeness and life? Where do we need to push through our fears and take risks to find healing, both as individuals and as a community? Here are a couple of answers I might suggest. You might come up with other ones. I think the other side for this church, and many others as well, is engaging in conversations about issues that can cause controversy. For instance, an explicit welcome and affirmation of LGBTQIA, so that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual people, or addressing racism and white supremacy, or immigration and asylum seekers. We don't want to go there because we're afraid of the storms that might come up, of people leaving, of people hurting and getting hurt. What accompanies this is the rule that we don't do or say things that might cause people to leave. The other side of that same coin is the rule that we do whatever we can to retain the current membership. It's like when you call to cancel a membership to something and they send you to the retention specialist. A few more questions to consider. Where are we considering or have considered change, but have feared the unknown consequences? Where could we take a deep breath, make a move, and be ready to face whatever comes our way? Where could we risk discomfort, knowing that we are never removed from God's love? Where can we act in faith, not of God's protection or immunity from difficulty, but of God's steadfast presence with us? Faith does not, in fact, mean we are to be free of fear, or even that we can never act out of fear. What it means is that God is with us in our fear. God understands our fear. And God reaches out to us, sometimes in a miracle healing, sometimes in the touch of a hand, sometimes in the courage to move out of our comfort zone or break the rules, sometimes in scientists working diligently to understand and stop a brand new viral threat. May we be amazed at the way God works in our lives and in our church. And then may someone bring us something to eat. Amen. Let us take a few moments now to reflect on these readings and these words with accompaniment of music. Friends, it is that time in our service where we share our joys and concerns with each other. So I'm going to pause the recording of Zoom, which is going to tell me that this is part. We are still not quite ready to be passing plates among the pews, but there are baskets in the back of the sanctuary that you might use for your offering as you leave worship this morning. The freshness of God's mercy and love, the continued generosity of God's gifts to us, call for thanksgiving and generosity on our part. This church stands because of the faithful generosity of those who came before us, and its ministry grows today because of the hopeful, expectant generosity that lives in us. Let us gather our gifts together then, and offer them to God in gratitude, heartfelt commitment, and praise. Let us take just a moment of silence as we reflect on our gifts, financial or otherwise, that we might offer the world this week.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise God, all creatures here below. Praise God above the heavenly hosts. Praise God, sights and holy hosts.
Let us join in our prayer of dedication. Generous God, take our gifts this day and use them so that we may be part of your great work in this world. Through our giving, bring a brighter day of justice and love, not just in our community, but in the world beyond these walls. Strengthen our church and the whole Christian church so that we grow together each day into a powerful voice for healing and peace. Amen. Now let us join our voices together in our sending hymn, which is inside your insert, Great is Your Faithfulness.
Great is your faithfulness, O God, Creator. With you no shadow of turning we see. You do not change your compassions, they fail not. All of your goodness forever will be. Great is your faithfulness. Great is your faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, your hand has provided. Great is your faithfulness, God, unto me. Summer and winter and springtime and harvest, sun, moon, and stars in their courses above. Join with all nature and manifold witness to your great faithfulness, mercy, and great is your faithfulness. Great is your faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, your hand has provided. Great is your faithfulness, God, unto me. Pardon for sin and a peace so enduring, your own dear presence to cheer and to guide. Strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is your faithfulness. Great is your faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, your hand has provided. Great is your faithfulness, God, unto me.
Deep in our hearts, we know that we are children of God. Remember who you are then, and walk in the assurance of God's presence and love with you always, calling you beyond fear into belief and joy. And may the grace and peace of God, the Creator, the Redeemer, and the Sustainer be upon you this day and remain with you. Amen.